A modern tiny home can be only a few hundred square feet and still come with a surprisingly large list of things required to make it comfortable. High-performance insulation, custom windows, a compact heat pump, built-in furniture that has to serve 3 different purposes, a staircase with drawers inside it, a dining table that disappears into a wall. None of those ideas is necessarily bad. Some are genuinely clever. But step inside that same tiny house during a Florida power outage in August, close the doors against the mosquitoes, and the promise of simple living can begin to feel strangely dependent on complicated equipment. The house may be small, yet keeping it livable can still require a machine running almost constantly. That raises an uncomfortable question. Does a small house really provide freedom if ordinary comfort depends on expensive systems, specialized parts, and a carefully controlled indoor environment? Or did working families in Florida understand something about small house comfort that many modern builders have forgotten? Long before air conditioning became normal, Floridians built simple wooden houses with broad roofs, deep porches, raised floors, high ceilings, and windows positioned so air could move through the rooms instead of dying against a wall. These houses were not perfect. They could be humid, vulnerable to insects, difficult to secure, and miserable during the worst weather. Nobody should pretend that living without modern cooling was easy. Yet, the basic thinking behind these homes deserves another look, because it began with a question that modern tiny home marketing sometimes avoids. What does a human body actually need in order to feel comfortable here? The answer produced a family of buildings now commonly associated with Florida cracker architecture. The name covers more than one exact floor plan. Some examples were little more than plain cabins. Others grew into larger farmhouses with separate wings, dog trot passages, screened porches, or detached kitchens connected by covered walkways. What united them was not a fashionable appearance. It was a practical response to heat, rain, humidity, scarce materials, and the daily work of family life. These buildings were usually wood-framed and relatively straightforward. They often stood above the ground on piers. Their rooms were opened with tall windows. Porches covered part or much of the exterior. Roofs extended beyond the walls to create shade. The plans could be narrow, divided into separate blocks, or arranged around an open passage that allowed breezes to move through. Nothing about that sounds as dramatic as a tiny house with a hidden television, a motorized bed, and a staircase that doubles as a closet. Yet the old house may have been solving a more important problem. Instead of asking how many functions could be compressed into one box, it asked how the box could become less hostile to the person inside it. Begin with the porch, because this is where people often misunderstand the house. On a modern floor plan, a porch may be treated as an optional lifestyle feature. It is something added after the bedrooms, kitchen, bathrooms, and garage have consumed the budget. Sometimes it is barely deep enough for 2 chairs. Sometimes it becomes an uncovered platform that looks pleasant in a real estate photograph, but is unusable under the midday sun. On a traditional Florida house, the porch could do much more serious work. A deep roof kept direct sunlight away from walls, doors, and windows. Before insulation or mechanical cooling could remove heat from the building, the design tried to prevent some of that heat from entering in the first place. That sounds obvious. It is also one of the principles modern construction has repeatedly made more difficult by using shallow overhangs, large exposed windows, and dark exterior surfaces, then relying on air conditioning to correct the result. A useful porch also changed the practical size of the home. Imagine a small family house with no formal dining room, no separate office, and no oversized living area. A covered porch could become the place where beans were snapped, tools were repaired, wet shoes were removed, children played during a rain shower, and neighbors sat without being invited into the private rooms of the house. It was not conditioned square footage, but it was still living space. That distinction matters. Tiny homes are often praised for reducing interior area, yet many are displayed on empty lots with little thought given to comfortable space immediately outside the walls. Once the owner parks the house, the door may open onto gravel, mud-blazing sun, or a set of temporary steps. The advertised 300 square feet remains 300 square feet because the surrounding land has not been designed to support daily life. A small, cracker-inspired house with a genuinely deep covered porch may have a slightly larger roof and a higher material cost, but the person living there gains a place to sit, eat, talk, cool down, or welcome someone without unfolding the entire interior. That is not decorative nostalgia. It is a different way of calculating useful space. The porch also provides a kind of psychological relief that is difficult to express in a floor plan number. Small rooms can feel comfortable when the eye has somewhere to travel and the body can step outdoors without becoming immediately exposed. A door opening onto shaded space feels different from a door opening directly into heat and rain. For an older person who spends more time at home, that transition can become one of the most valuable places in the building. It offers fresh air without requiring a walk across uneven ground. It permits conversation without surrendering the privacy of the bedroom or kitchen. It allows a person to remain connected to the day even when mobility becomes limited. That is a great deal of human value coming from what a developer might dismiss as unconditioned area. Then there is the movement of air. A window does not create useful ventilation merely because it opens. Air needs a way in and a way out. If every opening is placed on one side of a room, a breeze may enter near the window while the deeper part of the space remains still. Traditional Florida houses often used windows on different exterior walls, central halls, breezeways, or aligned doorways to create a path through the building. A National Park Service description of the Marjorie Kinnan Rawlings farmhouse notes tall windows placed on the exterior walls of individual rooms to provide cross-ventilation. The house was also made from several units, joined by wide porches, showing how additions could be connected without turning the building into one deep, sealed mass. That arrangement was not simply picturesque. It gave more rooms access to outside air. Imagine a warm afternoon when the temperature is still uncomfortable, but the air begins to move. In a sealed, tiny home, the owner may have only two choices: keep the mechanical system running or open one small window and hope. In a narrow house with openings on opposite or adjacent sides, the same breeze can enter one wall, travel across the room, and leave through another. Add a ceiling fan, and the body may feel noticeably more comfortable, even when the thermometer has not changed much. This does not mean the room becomes cold. It means perspiration can evaporate more effectively, and heat does not remain trapped around the occupants. The difference is not romantic, it is physical. A poorly planned 250 square foot house can feel more suffocating than a somewhat larger house with a clear path for air. Smallness alone does not create efficiency. Sometimes it simply reduces the volume of air in which heat, cooking odors, moisture, and two people's daily activities are concentrated. This is one reason the shape of the Florida house matters as much as its total area. A relatively narrow plan gives more rooms access to exterior walls. That allows more windows, more daylight, and more opportunities for cross-ventilation. Modern developers often prefer deeper plans because they can reduce exterior wall area and fit buildings more efficiently on a site. That may make construction economical, but it can leave the center of the home dependent on artificial light and mechanical air movement. The older strategy spent more of the building's perimeter on the comfort of the people inside. Again, there is a cost. More exterior wall can mean more material and more surface requiring maintenance. Yet it also means a bedroom can have a real window with a real view instead of being pushed beneath a loft or into the darkest part of a compact box. The raised floor worked with the same logic. Many traditional wooden houses did not sit directly on damp soil. They stood on brick, stone concrete, or timber supports, leaving a crawl space beneath the floor. This separated vulnerable wood from direct ground contact and allowed some air movement below the structure. It also made certain repairs and utility work possible without opening finished interior surfaces. For a family with limited money, the ability to reach a pipe or inspect part of the floor framing could matter more than a polished concrete slab that looked clean on the day the house was completed. A raised house can also respond to particular site conditions, although nobody should assume that an old-fashioned pier foundation automatically makes a modern home flood-safe. Current elevation foundation wind and flood requirements are site-specific and far more demanding than simply copying the appearance of an old cabin. Raising the floor also creates an obvious problem steps. A house that sits above the ground may be cooler underneath and easier to inspect, but it becomes harder to enter for someone using a wheelchair walker or carrying groceries with an injured knee. A modern version needs a properly designed ramp, gradual approach, or other accessible entrance planned from the beginning. That consumes space and money. This is where admiration for old houses must remain honest. A feature that helped protect the structure can create a barrier for the person living in it. Good design has to solve both problems, not choose one and ignore the other. Perhaps the most revealing Cracker House idea was the willingness to separate activities that did not belong together. In some houses, cooking took place in a detached or semi-detached kitchen connected to the main living area by a porch or breezeway. Fire was one concern. Heat, smoke, grease, and odor were others. Before an electric range and exhaust hood, cooking could add a punishing amount of heat to a building that had no air conditioner waiting to remove it. Moving the kitchen away from sleeping rooms meant the family did not have to carry the full heat of supper into bed. Think about what that says about the modern tiny home. In many compact layouts, the stove sits only a few feet from the mattress. One person cannot fry food, wash dishes, or make coffee without affecting the other person's sleeping space. Moisture from cooking moves through the entire house. Smells settle into bedding and clothing. The refrigerator cycles beside the sofa. A television conversation reaches every corner. Designers call this open-plan living, but inside a very small house, it can become forced participation in every activity another person performs. That may be acceptable for one person. It may even feel intimate for a couple during a weekend trip. Over 10 or 20 years, however, the absence of separation can become exhausting. The traditional house did not necessarily provide luxurious rooms. It provided distance. A covered passage between the kitchen and the main house allowed two parts of life to remain connected without being compressed into the same air. A modern owner probably would not want to walk outdoors through an unscreened breezeway every time it rains. Yet the underlying principle remains useful. A small home does not have to be one undivided volume. A compact kitchen wing, a utility room that buffers the bedroom, or a screened and closable passage can preserve privacy and control heat without requiring a large suburban floor plan. The point is not to recreate every inconvenience of 19th century life. It is to notice that separation can sometimes be more humane than compression. This becomes especially clear when comparing sleeping arrangements. Many modern tiny homes place the primary bed in a loft because the footprint is too small for a ground floor bedroom. On a tour, the loft looks cozy. It creates the feeling of a cabin bunk tucked beneath the roof. For a healthy 30-year-old, climbing a ladder may be no problem. At 65, after a hip replacement during an illness, or simply on a tired night when the bathroom is downstairs, that same loft can become the reason a person must leave the house. A home meant to create financial independence can quietly carry an expiration date based on the owner's needs. There is something painful about that. People often choose small houses because they want security. They want a manageable payment, fewer possessions, less maintenance, and a place where they can remain independent as they age. Yet, the design may require them to climb, crouch, fold, and lift more often than they did in a larger house. The floor area has been reduced, but the amount of physical negotiation has increased. A modest cracker-inspired cottage with a real ground-floor bedroom may occupy more land than a tiny house on wheels, but it treats sleep as a permanent human need rather than a function to be stored above the kitchen. The bed can remain a bed. The dining table can remain a table. A person can get up at night without facing a ladder. That sounds ordinary because it is ordinary, and ordinary comfort is exactly what housing should protect. Privacy matters too. Picture a retired couple living in a 300-square-foot home. One person goes to sleep at 9, the other wants to read, watch television, or make tea. In a single-room plan, every light and sound becomes a negotiation. The couple may love one another deeply and still need a door. That door is not wasted space. It is a small instrument of respect. The same is true when a child or grandchild visits. A home should not be judged only on how efficiently it accommodates the owner's perfect weekday routine. Life includes sickness arguments, guests, early mornings, late nights, and moments when one person needs to be alone. Older cottages often used straightforward rooms rather than elaborate, transforming furniture. They did not always use space efficiently by modern standards, but they recognized that separate rooms could support separate human needs. The porch could absorb visitors during the day. A bedroom could remain private. A kitchen could continue operating without turning the entire house into a cooking zone. Nothing had to slide out of a cabinet before life could begin. Another advantage was the possibility of growth. The Rawlings farmhouse, for example, developed as separate units and additions connected by porches. That kind of incremental building reflects a reality many families understand needs change, but money does not always arrive all at once. A couple may begin with a bedroom, living room, kitchen, bathroom, and porch. Years later, they may need a second bedroom, a workroom, or a place for an aging parent. A simple building shape can make such additions easier to imagine than a highly optimized tiny house in which every wall already contains plumbing, storage, folding hardware, or structural compromises. Expansion is never automatically cheap. It requires plans, permits, foundation work, utility changes, and a site that allows it. Still, a house, designed with a logical place to grow, offers something valuable: permission for the occupants' lives to change. Many tiny homes promise freedom through mobility. That is a genuine advantage for the right person. Someone who owns suitable land, travels frequently, lives alone, or wants a temporary residence may prefer a smaller, movable unit. A Florida cracker-inspired cottage does not defeat that use case. It is less mobile, likely needs a permanent foundation, and may require more roof and more site preparation. The comparison becomes useful only when the goal is long-term living. For that purpose, the older design asks better questions. Can the bedroom be reached without climbing? Can two people carry out different activities without disturbing one another? Can air move naturally when outdoor conditions are pleasant? Is there shaded space beyond the walls? Can the house accept an additional room later? Can normal furniture remain in place instead of performing tricks? These questions are not as visually exciting as a countertop that transforms into a staircase. They matter more on the 1000th morning in the house than they do during the first tour. None of this means a Florida cracker house can simply be copied and expected to perform like a modern, high-efficiency home. Natural ventilation has limits, and Florida humidity is one of the largest. Moving humid air across the skin can make a person feel better, but it does not remove moisture from the building. During the hottest and wettest periods, open windows may invite air that carries more moisture than anyone wants inside walls, bedding, books, or cabinets. A University of Florida publication documenting a contemporary cracker-inspired house described cross-ventilation as useful during periods of moderate temperature and lower humidity, while mechanical cooling was still required during the hottest part of the year. That distinction matters. Saying that the design eliminates air conditioning would be dishonest. A better designed house may reduce the hours when mechanical cooling is needed. It may remain tolerable for longer during a mild weather outage. It may allow the occupants to open the building during spring or fall rather than sealing it year-round. But it still needs modern insulation, air sealing where appropriate, moisture control, and efficient cooling for conditions passive design cannot overcome. Open windows also bring insects, pollen, dust, outdoor noise, and security concerns. Screens help, but screens reduce airflow and require maintenance. Deep porches need posts, beams, roofing footings, and labor. A wide roof is not free simply because the space beneath it is outdoors. Raised construction may demand more complicated foundations, stairs, railings, and storm-resistant connections. Wood siding can be beautiful and repairable, but it must be protected from water, termites decay, and wind-driven rain. A simple historical roof form may be easier to understand than a complicated modern roof, yet every part still has to meet current structural requirements. Florida's building environment is not forgiving. Wind, flood exposure, rainfall, salt air in coastal areas, insurance requirements, local zoning, and product approvals can all influence what can legally and sensibly be built. The old house provides principles, not permission to ignore modern engineering. Cost deserves the same honesty. Tiny home advertisements frequently display the price of the structure without the full cost of creating a legal place to live. The buyer may still need land surveys, delivery permits, utility connections, a well or municipal water, septic or sewer service, grading, drainage, a foundation or approved pad, stairs, a driveway, and sometimes engineering. A low advertised price can be real and still fail to represent the final project. The Florida Cracker House has no magical exemption from those expenses. In fact, a permanent cottage with a large roof and porch may cost considerably more than the smallest manufactured tiny home. Its value lies somewhere else. The shape can be straightforward. The rooms can use ordinary furniture. Doors and windows do not have to be custom designed around a highway width limit. The owner can spend money on shade ventilation, moisture control, durable roofing, and a comfortable bedroom instead of paying for elaborate mechanisms that make one surface perform several jobs. The cheapest house on the day of purchase is not always the least expensive house to live with. A bargain becomes less impressive when the owner later discovers that the loft is unusable, the air conditioner is undersized, the bathroom lacks ventilation, there is nowhere to sit outside, and every repair requires a specialized component hidden behind built-in cabinetry. Real affordability includes the cost of correcting decisions that looked clever before anyone lived with them. So what would a sensible, modern version look like? It would not be a historical reproduction with modern appliances pushed inside. It would begin with a compact but livable floor plan, probably larger than the extreme end of the tiny house market, but still far smaller than the average new suburban house. The primary bedroom would be on the ground floor with enough clearance to move around the bed. The bathroom would be accessible without climbing and designed with future mobility in mind. The house would remain relatively narrow, so main rooms could reach exterior walls and receive light and air from more than one direction. Operable windows would be positioned to create a real ventilation path rather than being scattered for appearance. Deep overhangs would be sized and oriented to protect openings from strong sun and rain where practical. A covered porch would be deep enough for a table and chairs, not merely wide enough to satisfy a style label. High ceilings and ceiling fans could improve air movement, while a carefully designed envelope insulation, flashing drainage, and dehumidification would handle conditions the historic house could not. The roof would remain simple, with fewer unnecessary valleys and intersections where water can collect or maintenance becomes difficult. Doors, glazing connections, and structural systems would be selected for the local wind zone and site rather than for nostalgia. Efficient air conditioning would still be installed, but the house would not surrender every hour of comfort to it. On a mild morning, the occupants could open opposite windows. In the afternoon, the porch and overhang would keep direct sun away from much of the glass. During a rain shower, there would still be somewhere protected to sit outside. If one person went to bed, another could remain in a small living area with a door between them. If a grandchild visited, the porch and an actual second room or convertible study could receive them without forcing the entire household to dismantle its normal arrangement. If the owners grew older, the house would not suddenly become inaccessible because the only bed was above the refrigerator. University of Florida design work has continued to revisit Florida cracker ideas in modern projects, particularly the value of modular planning, porches, shade, and a building envelope that can interact with the climate rather than resisting it through mechanical power alone. That does not prove one historical type is the solution to the housing crisis. It shows that useful knowledge can survive even when the original way of life has disappeared. The Florida cracker house does not beat every modern tiny home. It cannot travel down a highway. It uses more land. Its porch and roof add cost. It still needs cooling moisture control screens maintenance and careful engineering. On some sites, a compact manufactured home or well-designed tiny house will be the more reasonable choice. Yet the old Florida house exposes a weakness in the way small homes are often sold. The industry celebrates how little space a person can occupy. It pays less attention to how much inconvenience that person must accept every day to make the space function. Those are not the same achievement. A home is not intelligent because the bed can disappear. It is intelligent when the person living there can sleep safely at 70. It is not efficient merely because the dining table folds into the wall. It is efficient when two people can live ordinary lives without constantly moving furniture out of one another's way. It is not affordable simply because the shell has a low price. It is affordable when the owner can maintain it cool, adapt it, and remain there without an expensive redesign. And it is not freedom if the house asks its occupants to fight for comfort every morning, every meal, and every night. The families who built Florida's early wooden houses did not possess a perfect answer. They endured heat, humidity, storms, insects, and hardships that modern homeowners should not be asked to romanticize. What they did possess was close attention to place. They watched where the sun struck the wall. They noticed which direction the afternoon breeze arrived from. They used the roof to create shade before trying to remove heat. They allowed air to pass through the house. They separated fire and cooking from sleep. They created useful space between indoors and outdoors. Most importantly, the building was expected to serve the rhythms of human life. That may be the lesson worth recovering. A small house should not require a smaller version of dignity. It should not make aging feel like a design failure or privacy feel like an unaffordable luxury. Modern tiny homes often sell the image of freedom, fewer possessions, less debt, a clean interior, and an open road beyond the window. The Florida Cracker House asks a harder and more useful question. Long after the photographs have been taken and the novelty has disappeared, does the house still help the people inside live decently every day?